Welcome to the Afflatus, a podcast that brings you career insights from the minds of industry leaders. I'm your host, Alok Rathod, and each week I'll be interviewing experts from various fields to uncover their secrets to success. On the show today, we have Brian Gavin, who is an executive software leader based in New York. Most recently with Globaledit, Brian is a hands-on operational leader with extensive experience in developing and scaling cloud applications. Originally from Connecticut, Brian earned his bachelor's degree in business management and economics at Western New England University. Brian is a pioneer in digital content production, distribution, and analytics. Brian enjoys mentoring and contributing to the community through various thought leadership channels. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So, I'm curious about how did you get your start in the software industry?
Yeah, so it was 2009, which at the time, the economic stability was kind of being shaken up. Tech was being shaken up. Google and Facebook were kind of like the tech startup pioneers still. And the school that I was getting my undergrad from, it was mostly to either go into finance or law, but they also had a pretty strong business program. And so I was always kind of a tech junkie at heart. And I dabbled a little bit in finance for about 6 months and really realized that my passion was in technology. And I was really fortunate to start my career at Indeed, which at the time was about 100 employees. So it was certainly tech startup life for real.
Yeah. And that's so interesting, right? Like, because I started my journey with tech and I switched to finance along the way. And then you started with finance and then switched to tech. That is like really interesting. It's so how was like the early days of Indeed, like very scrappy, startup-y kind of culture? Was there something that really stood out to you about that time at that company?
Yeah, so the founders were very involved with the business, and I worked for a very influential manager and now mentor of mine. And one of the components that during the interview process, I'll never forget, I interviewed with the founder, Paul Forrester in Stamford, Connecticut. Okay. And it was about the passion, about what you can bring. I was virtually no experience. I was just out of college. I had only a few months, certainly some internships under my belt, and that passion that everyone in the office had to have. There was just a vibe that people were in it to win it because we won, we had a clear mission, and we rallied behind it, which was fun. It made for, everyone was excited to come to work every day.
Yeah, that's great. So now fast forward all these years later, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing the tech industry?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this ahead of time, and we're really at a very unique position where technology has almost outpaced, I think, some of the skill sets, both in the buyer of your software, whether you're B2B or you're B2C, but also just the roles that are so typical in a software organization now. Obviously, ChatGPT has blown up. AI is sort of the buzzword of 2023 to start. Yeah. And job restructuring is really something that I think organizations, especially startups, need to think about, because the typical jobs that you've relied on having for operational and sales and marketing are changing so quickly. And keeping up with that technology and what technology can deliver for both internally your organization, but also to your consumer and your buyer, having a close grasp on that is really important.
Yeah, I agree. Like, a lot of people have been just like in awe of like how, ChatGPT or other generative AIs can like come up with a blog post or a story or a marketing copy. And so a lot of people are like scared that, okay, if it could generate so much so quickly, like, am I even required in this role? And that's a valid concern, especially for like smaller companies when they only have like limited funds and they are trying to make the most of it.
Yeah.
So it certainly has like raised some alarm bells. But from a consumer standpoint, it's also like a great technology where you can quickly iterate your ideas or like generate a code and see that, are you thinking along the same lines? So that's pretty cool. Okay, so early days of Indeed industry facing all these challenges. Along the way, you transitioned to Globaledit, right?
Yeah.
So what is Globaledit and like how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so Globaledit is a digital asset management platform, and we focus on the work in progress component of creating content, but also now distributing. And I transitioned into Globaledit after about 7 years at Indeed. We went through an acquisition at Indeed, and Recruit purchased Indeed. We grew to about 5,000 employees, and I really wanted to get back to the roots of a startup. And there was a lot of overlapping synergies between the jobs search space and the technologies that job search uses, and actually the technologies that power content management. So I was given an amazing opportunity by the founder of Globaledit, and really no regrets. It's an amazing opportunity, and have learned so much.
Great. So what is like the core function of Globaledit? It's just like creative asset management, or does it provide like end-to-end creative management services?
Yeah, so Globaledit provides end-to-end content management. It's very unique in its space because from the time in which you start planning production, you can actually leverage Globaledit. It's particularly helpful in e-commerce, which is obviously blown up. The retail space has changed dramatically, where your brick and mortar way of reaching the consumer has changed, and e-commerce is so powerful. So Globaledit focuses on helping brands get content produced more efficiently in your studio and planning actually for that execution, but all the way through the delivery. And now a big part of what we're looking at is how does, especially with technology changing so much, is how does it now change how content is served to the consumer, and can we be more intelligent about the content that we do produce, or we recommend that brands produce, because of that end-to-end life cycle management that we can help harness for the content.
Yeah. And that's really great, because when I first started producing content, I didn't realize how many like moving parts there are, right? Like, so you have to conceptualize, produce, edit, and like all those creative assets has to be centralized in some form.
Yeah.
So it makes for good collaboration. Otherwise, it's just very difficult to like have that distributed, workflow where people are doing their own thing, but when you put it together, it's just like something weird. So yeah, I think that's great.
And it's very interesting. The typical process, whether you're producing audio or video and motion or 2D or now 3D, is it's a very much a passing of a baton process. And so a huge part about what I'm very passionate about is how can you automate parts of that workflow, but also make it more intelligent. It's very much a systemized, let me tap you on my shoulder and tell the next person that they can start their job. Whereas if you can create as much efficiency and allow folks to work simultaneously, obviously that's, creates power and efficiency. So.
Yeah, and that's the only reason I can collaborate across like 5 different countries and like have something put together where people are working across different time zones. Otherwise, it's just very hard to like manage just the time zones, let alone like the workload. So yeah, that's great. And right, so what strategies have you implemented at Globaledit to ensure that it remains competitive?
Absolutely. So one of the most important is around our people, and that everyone understands the mission and the goals. And so W planning, which is an objective and an initiative-based methodology. My goal is to make sure that the leadership team understands the vision and the mission, and that there's buy-in there, that there's accountability all the way down to the interns who are working with us. So having that framework of accountability, that was something I learned very early on at Indeed, which was everyone had accountability. I was brand new day one. I had as much accountability as the person who had been there since the start. And also advancing the technology. Globaledit, we rebuilt the platform to be hosted entirely in AWS. So it's a serverless architecture, which is very powerful, and I think that puts us a step ahead of folks who are just thinking about moving off of their on-prem infrastructure and going entirely cloud-based. So there's a technology strategy, and then the business strategy, which I think if we can have people who are very empowered and efficient, that's going to help our users in the biggest way.
Yeah, that's great. I think accountability is such a powerful tool, and not only it helps build empathy, but also helps to plan resources in a manner where we know exactly who's responsible for what. So it's individual ownership, but also like great teamwork. So I think, yeah, that's great. Now, for people aspiring, like the budding tech entrepreneurs, what would be your advice to them if they're looking to enter the tech industry?
Yeah, and this was some of the best advice I ever got, which was to take big risks. I'm a fairly conservative, actually kind of introverted person, which most folks who know me would say you're the most outgoing person ever. And so taking risk was actually really challenging for me to get comfortable with.
Yeah.
Those risks need to be calculated. And so making sure that the risks that you take have focus and purpose. And the big aspect is you're going to want to take on a lot, right? And you need to have a sole focus. You need to know why is your consumer or your user base interested in your product, and what's that value, and focus on that value and only that value. Because if you get distracted, it becomes expensive. It will set you back from ultimately the bigger goals that you could potentially accomplish.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's solid advice. And I think that goes for like any entrepreneur, not let alone like tech entrepreneurs. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's the idea of risk today it's a lot less expensive, if you will, because the technology and the innovation that you can develop and invest in is, I think, a lot more tangible. The barrier to entry for a software company to get started today is drastically different than it was 10 years ago, and I'm sure 10 years from now it'll be even different. So taking those risks are super important, and we're in a unique opportunity today to actually pursue those risks, and ultimately those risks are your big bets, right? The things that are going to change your business.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's so much you could just try out before you get into any sort of launch or production or prototyping. Even just testing the idea is so easy these days, right?
Yeah.
You have a ready audience available. You have tools to just visualize. Even if it is just designing a UI and looking at, oh, this is how my app will look like, or this is how the interface will look like.
Yeah.
That itself is a good idea to just discuss with people and getting that ball rolling. So
apps like Maze are amazing to go out and do testing on something. Yeah. The ability through Figma to prototype and it's incredible to me how much different it is to run and develop a startup software company today than it was. Yeah, I mean at the time I graduated.
Yeah,
and the infrastructure investment. If you did not have access to the infrastructure that the cloud now makes so readily available, and you had to have those startup costs from an infrastructure and hardware perspective, so the barriers again are so much different now. I think that does require a unique way of thinking, though. You were asking what's going to potentially disrupt the tech space and that job restructuring. Again, it's really important to make sure that your people are focused on the highest value items. And that social media blog post writer, maybe you let the AI write your blog post, but how does that person's the job function change, and how do they enhance the value that technology brings to your organization?
Yeah, no, I agree. So given that tech is always growing by leaps and bounds every few years, what role does innovation play in growing a particular tech company?
Yeah, so innovation is the backbone, and I'll make an interesting reference here. But it's if you're the carpenter, you may have a home that needs repair, right? Or if you're the mechanic, your car is broken down. And so, as a technology company, it's not only important that you innovate for your buyer, for your user base, but also innovate internally. Yeah. Kind of have this concept of people, process, and technology, and you need to bring those three things forward simultaneously, and innovate. Right? It's not just innovate the technology that your consumer has, but innovate the technology that your sales team has or your client support team has, and the processes. Again, processes that used to go into publishing a blog post a year ago are different than they are today.
Yeah, I agree. I've lived in both worlds where I had to start with an idea, with an outline, write each paragraph, and keep perfecting each and every word and structure until I'm ready to post something.
Mm-hmm.
now, even if you are just looking at structure, you can just write a prompt in an AI, like, hey, generate a blog post on the emerging trends in tech, right? And it will just give you like the points, like a fully written like blog post. But I mean, it's just crazy to me that it can pull together all of those things so quickly, and that I think will disrupt a lot of things. But in the sense that it also needs that human touch, at least now, as of now, because I feel that we need that human eye to sort of validate some of the ideas. Also, ChatGPT is like pretty bad with facts and numbers.
Yeah.
It sometimes comes up with like its own random names and random research articles. So if anybody is like trying to use that as like for like homework or projects, then not advisable. If you want to write a creative story or if you just want to play around, that's great. But yeah, it's known to like, make factual errors like pretty frequently. So it's still learning.
Yep.
So I think we still need humans to sort of cross-check that and validate that, because you could that could ruin your reputation if you are a professional company and you come up with something that has like fake sources or fake articles or like fake references, and it's like, oh, these guys are just winging it, like, people wouldn't like trust you. So
the credibility piece will get questioned. Yeah.
So it's that. How has your company adapted to meet the consumer demand in this increasingly digital world?
Yeah, so it's interesting when the increasingly digital world means more content. More content. We used to be bound by how much storage. You deal in petabytes of storage, and especially with photo and video. And now I think storage is a commodity that is so readily available that that's out the window. And so allowing brands to understand how to build an archive, that the archive on a server that their IT team manages is drastically different than what could be done through a cloud-hosted application.
Yep.
The content formats now are so different. And the most interesting aspect, and this is part of like the job restructuring, is the primary users of Globaledit were most often a retoucher within a company, the videographer, the photographer, the digital tech, and now I think a huge change about how content's created is putting the tools that for content creation and content adaptation in the hands of the marketers who know the consumer, but just didn't have those creative skill sets that were required to edit a video or to retouch a photo. And now how quickly can those tools be put into the hands of those that touch the consumer, because that's really powerful, right? If you can generate content, it's sort of like last mile delivery of content and focusing more on knowing your consumer. And so that'll change how we work with brands who want to produce content.
Yeah, right. And you're right when you say that, more demand means more content.
Yeah.
More content also raises questions around privacy and security.
Yeah.
So how do you ensure data security and privacy for your customers?
So I want to just jump back to one thing, which is sort of the 80-20 rule. I think the content demand is going to reach a point where brands can't produce more content, and that the 20% of the content that you produce actually matters. That also will help make things like security and privacy easier to manage. It's a part of our culture. It's a part of everyone's job to respect each other internally and to carry that same mission externally to the user base. You have to have an owner of privacy and security.
Yeah.
We rely on security experts in our field as well. And I spend a lot of time talking with security experts at large networks, cutting edge brands, to also learn how they're addressing security, because it's changing so much, especially global brands. And being global, you have different security policies and restrictions in Europe than you do in the US and certainly in APAC. So you have to stay up to date on what laws are changing, and it needs to be in everyone's best interest, that security and privacy, because that's how you build trust. And trust is really, I think that's something we take for granted. Everyone now has an iPhone. Everyone is using software. And there's going to be a point where, you have to think about how do you retain the trust of your audience.
Right. Yeah. And when you say like only 20% of the content that produced is matters, then I'm like, does that mean that 8 episodes out of 10 that I produce aren't going to be fun? Like, that's not a encouraging statistic. Like, I feel like.
Well, there's also, I think there'll be components of today's conversation that are really, really valuable, and some of the rest of it, may not engage the audience. And how do you have those listening devices? I think you once had data scientists who are the only people that understood data, that could access it, that could process it. And now that intelligence about what does your listener base engage in and what do they get excited about, or what content does the consumer click on that leads to a successful checkout, that information's available, so you got to take advantage of it.
Yeah. No, I think, the 20%, like the highlights, the meat of like the discussion ends up like being reels.
Yeah.
And then that just like becomes a way to like draw people into the longer conversation that, hey, if you found this interesting, maybe you would want to know more about like what Brian had to say about, the tech industry.
Yeah. And how to reuse it. I think that's like the shelf life of content today is so short, like fast fashion, TikTok, like these like pieces of content that are generated and then they're thrown away. Well, how can you reuse your content in different formats? You may write a blog post that becomes a podcast, that becomes a video. And so really having creative ways to leverage your content so that it is not just single use, because that's where it gets really expensive.
Yeah. No, I have a good editor who like chops up different pieces. Like, these are the reels, these are the carousels, these are like, the ad drafts and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's a great advice. And for anybody, I mean, like, it's not just for like, the content that I'm producing. Any content, you can repurpose it and extend the shelf life of it. Now, we spoke about like how, AI is going to disrupt a lot of industries. Stock analysts are using it to look at, which stocks to pick. Content creators are using it to like come up with ideas or like, write blog posts and stuff like that. What other industries you feel like is going to touch, or like it's like ripe for disruption, that AI is just going to like, change like the fundamental structure of like how things are done?
So the technology piece we touched on, manufacturing, which I know has been using it for quality control for a long time, is how to produce and manufacture content in an economy that is challenged in the U.S. Globally, a lot of market pressure. So manufacturing, definitely. For medical and healthcare.
Yeah.
There's so much data in any industry that I think technology was just the natural space where data was what drove decisions, right? If you were a data-driven technology company and you made data-driven decisions, it was very measured and calculated. And now every industry has access to that data. You might run a mechanic shop. You have access to data, right? So I think the manufacturing space, the healthcare space, and now certainly from a consumer perspective, the businesses and that adopted it were sort of the first ones to get access to it. Now the consumer is actually going to have access to make decisions and to leverage consumer-facing value-add technology that's AI-based. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And manufacturing and distribution is one thing that I was surprised to figure out that, okay, there are all these inventory planning methods that they use, and they are largely just based on historical data. But now you can deploy AI and just in real time, on weekly basis, you could come up with like how much is the demand and how many units you should produce. So you don't end up in a situation where you're overstocking your stuff. You also don't end up in a situation where you're understocking your stuff. And given that I used to work with an electronics distribution company, that was one of their biggest pain points, that, okay, we get all these perks and discounts when we order like 100 televisions, but then we still have to sell those 100 televisions. And if the demand is only for like 40 or 50, it takes twice as long to sell those, and like that much more effort in sales and marketing. So yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's going to like, it's like how the internet first came around, or how like calculator first came around, and it changed like the fundamental way in how we communicate or how we calculate, right? I think AI is going to be like one of those quantum leaps.
Yeah, and I think AI it can be somewhat of a nebulous term in some ways, but really the access to information, to data, in a more real time method means that it changes how your business makes decisions. You talked about the manufacturing component. That ties all the way to the website, where you now know what type of traffic are you getting to certain product categories. What are the trends that when they buy a shirt, do they match it with these particular, oh no, they're abandoning. Well, maybe we're missing a particular product that we should be manufacturing, and can I manufacture that more quickly? And so that, when you look at it, it really is from a consumer to the physical good. It's a supply chain opportunity for businesses to change how they evaluate what they're going to manufacture, how they plan. And it gets back to the reskilling, right? People are going to be asked to be so much more adaptable and to make decisions that are not planned from a campaign perspective, that are 4 months in advance.
At the core of every successful company is a strong leadership team.
Yep.
How do you go about building a leadership team that stands the test of time?
Some of the best successes that I've seen, one, raising leaders from within the organization is obviously great. If you can't do that and you're going to hire externally, having really clear, simple characteristics that are measurable for you to evaluate on. Past successes obviously are crucial, and that component that I get back to about when interviewing at Indeed, it was that passion that if you didn't possess it, you might have been the most successful. Your resume carries great success. Yeah. If that passion doesn't come across in the interview process, we also need to have trust. You need to know that I'm going to fail and it's okay. And then vice versa, as a leader, you're encouraged to fail quickly, fail in a smart way that allows you to learn. And the last component I would say is that having a leadership group that is focused on the success of their team members. We as leaders may look really successful, but it really is the people that we are there to guide and to mentor and to help really work in the trenches to get some of the hardest work done, to see the impact of their job, and they need to know that. Because I think the loyalty of the typical employee today is a lot different than it was 20 years ago when you got your watch for 20 years on the job. It's crazy. So it's our job as leaders, and it is so important that the leadership team know that the people are the backbone of your company. Certainly your software has intellectual IP, but the people are what actually create it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way I look at success of any team, whether leadership or execution, is that leaders who are leading the goal, they need to create like a safe environment for people to recognize that, okay, I have the flexibility and the freedom to like pursue my own ideas within the realm of what I'm expected to execute. Mm-hmm. And if I go down that direction and do it in a smart strategic way, as you said, then I won't be penalized for it. It's not like, a binary like yes or no kind of scenario where like if this is correct and this is how you're supposed to do it, mm-hmm. Versus like, okay, you have some freedom, some flexibility to try things and see if it leads to better results. And if yes, then that's great, because then you can implement new things much quicker. And if not, then that, okay, the tried and tested methods that we've been using is at least at the current level, like the most optimized version. So yeah, I think it all comes down to like earning that trust and, creating that environment and mentoring it, right? Like that's how you transfer skills. So
yeah. And it gets, you had asked about what are the strategic initiatives of the organization, and having a way that, it's our job as leaders to set goals, to have a vision, to obviously know what's going to win, but we also want to know from our team members, how are they going to help achieve those goals? And that's what's great is, you create an environment where it's actually your team creating the answers of how to win, not you from the top raining down.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to grow up in two tech companies where it is a very collaborative, agile way of going about achieving your goals. So it seems easy to discuss, but I know a lot of organizations that's not the culture. So breaking out of that culture can also be really difficult.
Yeah, I agree. Now, given that there is, any company, more specifically tech company, given that it touches like so many consumers on a daily basis, how could a tech company be a force for like positive social change?
Yeah, so having a beat on what the social change themes are. There's a huge focus. Today's actually International Women's Business Day, and so enacting change really is important to know what does your user base, what does your audience expect for change, right? Like the creatives that Globaledit touches expect a certain amount of change, and we deal a lot with metadata because metadata makes images and content and videos searchable. Well, a huge part of metadata today is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And having thought leadership in those spaces of what is changing, because those changes that our brands expect is actually because it's the consumers changing how they want to find content. They may not search for blue jeans the same way that we did 10 years ago. So driving that change is stay close to your consumer, know what the themes are, and be thought provoking, right? Push the boundaries.
Right. Yeah, I think so many companies have this like CSR initiatives where CSR means corporate social responsibility. And those are just like, PR exercises. Those are just the things that their team told them that, hey, just come up with something, make like little donations here and there. Looks good on the company, looks good on the annual report, and like that's it. But then there are companies who like actually are equally involved in that, where they consider that as like their mission to sort of give back to society in whatever form, right? Be it like doing free workshops or like, empowering certain disenfranchised groups, or just creating fun things like hackathons and stuff, right? So, which then turns into like a recruitment exercise sometimes. So I think it really comes down to the values of the company and like how they plan to deliver on what their consumers expect from them. And I think like having an initiative beyond just like your bottom line goes a long way with like your consumers, because then they feel like, okay, we are investing in a company that's not only there to make money and like pay like huge paychecks to like CEOs and directors, it's also making like, a good difference to the society. So yeah, I think you said it really well.
And it's a part of the business strategy, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion for metadata, it has to be a part of how the company evolves, because it's going to change the value that we deliver. It's not just something on paper that, we did this to check a box, right? Like that's going to change how the business and the platform functions.
As the president of Globaledit, how do you keep up with latest trends in the industry, given there's like so much information that, is emerging every day?
Yeah.
How do you keep up with all the latest trends?
I'm a very curious person by nature. And so I certainly read articles that are published. I listen to podcasts. I watch webinars. And I think the most important aspect is I've built a lot of relationships that are built on trust, that are built on the same passion for disrupting a very similar space. And so engaging with thought leaders, and someone might be an unrecognized thought leader, right? The new person on the job could have something that's really interesting to hear. So I spend a lot of my time, a lot of my day goes to talking with prospective customers, existing customers, to technology partners, to service partners and picking everyone's brain. I'm a very curious person. I like to talk. I like to ask a lot of questions. I take a lot of notes. My notebooks get filled up pretty quickly. So that really allows me to draw my own conclusions. And that's, I think the role as an executive in a company is for you to take all the information that you have access to and to create some of your own thought leadership, right? So to publish what the trends are, to write the company strategy. And I take it really seriously to make sure that I'm out in the community, engaging with anyone and everyone that I can. And I think, being friendly, it makes it easier to do.
Yeah, I agree. Great. How do you unwind after a long day of work?
Yeah, so I have a golden retriever. My wife and I, we have a golden retriever and a cat.
Yep.
So I walk the dog. We like to cook. So most every night, we cook a dinner, and that's how my wife and I get to enjoy time together. She's very busy in her career. She's an art teacher, and comes home probably more tired and exhausted than I am. So we use that time to spend it together, to bounce ideas off each other. And we're both big family people, so we spend time with our family and go outdoors, right? Go skiing, snowmobiling, and try to balance the work and the fun.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking before the interview began, and I was just like wondering that, okay, you have really piqued my interest about snowmobiling now, so I'm going to try that. Like that's a bucket list item now, so.
There you go. Maybe I can give you the good places to go.
Yeah, exactly. I'll reach out to you and like ask all the fun places for that. Great. So what's next for you and what's next for Globaledit?
Yeah, so I'm at a very interesting time where in my career at Globaledit, we've rebuilt the software, we've shown some great success. So I'm actually planning my next moves now to move on from Globaledit. The mission and the mandate was to develop a really powerful technology, and we accomplished that goal. For Globaledit, the scale of content, like we talked about, it's new formats of content, it's bigger files, changing how the really powerful workflow and editing components of content get put into new users or new team members of an organization like that marketer. And for me, I'm really focused on finding my next move that's going to allow me to take what I've learned from a cutting edge startup like Indeed and getting to build a software from the ground up at Globaledit to help drive the next innovative software company forward. Haven't really kind of put my finger on the pulse where that's going to be, but I think somewhere in the content space is definitely where it'll be, and going to get ready to start a family with my wife and try to have that work-life balance.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like a lot of fun things await you in the future. So I'm excited to see where your journey takes you. And yeah, it's great that you are already aware of it and like planning your career in a way that you know that you want to lead it into a particular direction. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. Can you tell me what passion drove you to start
this podcast?
Yeah.
So initially, my plan was not to get into any kind of content or storytelling, but I was studying at Harvard, and I being from India, I was like exposed to a lot of people from a lot of different cultures and backgrounds. And so during like social events, I would just talk to them. I'm like, hey, so you're from Germany. Tell me something about how is life there, how you grew up, things like that. And that was just a way for me to like understand people and see where they're coming from, what are their thoughts, their ideas. And as I started doing more and more of that, I realized that people have like wildly fascinating lives. They come from all sorts of background, all sorts of culture and understanding. So I just felt that, okay, I need to encapsulate that in some form, right? And I had a friend on campus. She actually went to film school before coming to Harvard. And so she's like, hey, you should do storytelling in some form. Let's do filmmaking. I'm like, filmmaking? I'm studying finance and economics. Like filmmaking is like so far off. And she's like, no, you have all these amazing stories about growing up in India and how you came here. and I'm working on a script that is like, really cool. So we can produce this thing together. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll write a check, become a producer, right? And then like, sure, whatever, right? And I didn't think much about it. I'm like, okay, yeah, here's your check, go make your film. And then I think 6 months later, she came back to me and said that, hey, remember the film that we produced together? I'm like, yeah, that's doing really well. We are getting invited to all this like film festivals and all the screenings. So you should come and like, as a producer, you need to talk to people. And I'm like, okay, that went like, from 0 to 100 very quickly. So I did that, and then we produced like bunch more films together. And then I realized, it's actually not that hard. It's not rocket science. If you really know what you're looking for, then you'll be able to achieve like, good storytelling. So it began with that. And then podcasting really happened because I needed something to keep me creatively occupied between two film projects. So for like 7-8 months, I don't want to like keep writing another screenplay or like going back and forth with editor and things like that. So like, okay, what can I do about like, this time gap I have in between? So I thought, you know what, I went to a business school. I know all these ideas about like running a corporation and things like that. Let me talk to other people and see how they feel about it. So it began with that, literally like on my old iPhone 5S, I'm just like recording, in the corner of my room to avoid echo and stuff like that. And now it's been like 4 seasons, 160 episodes. So yeah, we have managed to come a long way in like 4 years.
It's impressive.
Yeah. I guess one question I had for you was that what was your initial reaction once like the news of all these layoffs hit, right? Like this giant tech corporations laying off people and like writing off like entire divisions and stuff. Like a lot of people didn't really enjoy like the way it was done, but
yeah,
I mean, what was your initial thought?
Yeah, so it's definitely shocking because you're touching like the human element of business, which are the people. Some of the moves I think are probably a little bit short-sighted to show profitability, to keep the stockholders engaged, and others grew probably a little bit outside of their britches, right? They grew too much, and so it's a learning experience, right? Like I don't think we've still digested the whole, because 2 years ago or 3 years ago when work from home became the norm and so much has changed in the job space that it's like this was almost just another snowball in the action. I think I don't know, I'm still like curious about it and still digesting because a lot of it had to do with, like I said, like the protecting the profitability and maybe right-sizing the company. But in other ways, I think businesses are learning that they can operate in a way different fashion, right? Like what you once thought was I needed a whole team to manage a particular area of marketing is technology, like we talked about it's changing it. So it's, as a leader and as an executive, I think it's so important to understand how technology is changing the workspace, because mass layoffs are almost like the reactionary way of handling it, which you don't want to be in that place as a leader, right? So
yeah. I think a lot of executives and employees were kind of bummed about it because they had been with these companies for long periods of time, pretty much like the only company they have worked for, like sometimes for more than a decade and things like that. And then like, to be just like randomly dropped from a call while things were happening, or like not knowing that you had been fired until you come back from vacation and stuff. So I think a lot of people felt like, okay, you could have done this in a more graceful manner. But I mean, corporations also like don't enjoy layoffs. I mean, I don't know the inner workings of like how big tech companies do these things, but I'm pretty sure if they could retain a person, they would. And as you said, it's a reactionary measure and, leads to a lot of bad press, whether you like it or not. So I don't think that's like, they don't do it unless it's like absolutely required. But yeah, I think the way it is done, I think some people were not happy about it. And rightfully so. I mean, like I would be bummed if I worked for a company for 12 years and then I was just like sent a cold email saying that, hey, you have been laid off. So they are right on their end as well. So It's
And
that.
I think all of us, we all are accountable to someone else.
Yeah.
We have to think about what that means for our own career, for our own personal self-interest, and the freelance world and things like that. That's a little bit too risky for me, but
Yeah.
the job market is changing so much. Like your full-time 10-year job is kind of gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some people don't even see through the entire 3 months of internship these days. I mean,
Yeah.
which is always very surprising to me.
I'm a very loyal person, so it's like it's really weird to me. Like when I look at someone's resume and it's like 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. But I also understand that like if you don't take risks, like we talked about, and
Yeah.
then it's going to potentially stall your career. So
Yeah. This reminded me of a question, and I think I didn't ask that. But, now so much of the shift we see in education also, in the sense that like a lot of companies now don't require, especially tech companies don't require 4-year college degrees. They focus more on skills.
Yep.
And it seems like a lot of universities are also sort of adapting to that, where they don't require SATs now. They look at your skills, your life journey, your ambition, things like that. So do you think that if somebody is looking to enter in tech space, does a 4-year college degree still make sense?
short answer, yes. 4-year degrees, especially in the United States, have become so astronomically almost cost prohibitive. But yeah, I think it's more about the maturity that you develop in those 4 years. So maybe the education that's delivered, it probably could be a little bit more logical. It seems like from our grandfather's generation to our father's generation to now to our generation, that maturity, and now you look at the Gen Zs who are entering the workforce, is that maturity level. That's the most important thing. The best education I got was hands-on, on the job training. Which is the other component, is you have to invest in career advancement. I spent some time at University of Wisconsin, which was awesome. And thankfully my employer was so nice to invest in that. But that to me is almost the more valuable than the 4-year degree. But the 4-year degree is the maturity component that I think you gain, and the street smarts.
Yes. Again, 80-20 rule, I think 80% of the people do mature when they go to college. 20% don't. Those are the ones who are throwing ragers and dorm parties and and I've seen that at community colleges and Ivy League schools where you have these two separate groups of people, where some people are there just to have fun. And I mean, if they're having fun at an Ivy League school, then probably they don't need that degree to grow in their career. Maybe they come from a very famous, influential family, so they anyway have plans. But I mean, I think it's more of being in that environment and just understanding the diverse points of view, rather than the actual textbook knowledge that you get, because that's freely accessible now. But
I didn't read a lot of textbooks when I was in, I mean, to be honest with you, it was more about I went to a really small college where I was able to develop relationships with my professors who became mentors, who helped me. And that, I think, is, it's about networking now. And reading textbooks is kind of boring.
I agree. I was always skimming through the stuff or the case studies that we were given, and then go back and deep dive if required. But initially it's you have this 25 pages worth of dense material, and it's just too much. But I think it's more of the environment in which you exist rather than the formulas or the names and dates that you remember.
Right.
So thank you for tuning in to the Afflatus. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Brian Gavin and learned valuable lessons from his career journey. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay up to date on future episodes. And if you found this content helpful, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends and colleagues. Remember, success is not just about what you achieve, but how you achieve it. So keep pushing forward, stay motivated, and let the Afflatus be your guide on your journey towards success. Thank you.